Tonight, three widely different stories. The first, medical, the case of this woman, Mrs. Olga Heppel, and the way she is keeping herself alive. The second, still in Britain, is about the way we could solve a serious future problem, the shortage of water. And the third comes from deep space and concerns the search for life on other worlds. First, though, Mrs. Olga Heppel. Now, this is Mars as seen through a telescope. For 7.5 months, the space probe Mariner 4, there it is over on that side, has been heading for Mars at 30,000 miles per hour. Later tonight, it will fly past the planet at a distance of 6,000 miles, and it will take 21 pictures of Mars' surface. Early tomorrow morning, it will begin transmitting these pictures back to Earth. It's 134 million miles away. The signals will be picked up on receiving aerials of that type down there, and if this is successful, it will be a record in long-distance communications. These pictures will be transmitted bit by bit, and not until Saturday will scientists see the first close-ups of the Martian surface. To have steered the spacecraft a total of 350 million miles to her target is, of course, a fantastic achievement. It is, in fact, equivalent to hitting a farthing at Calais with a bullet fired from Dover. But the great question is, what will Mariner reveal? Of course, the possibility of life on Mars has been debated for many years. Faint lines seen on the surface have led to the idea that these were canals dug by the Martians, but I don't think anybody goes that far these days. A final answer to the tantalizing question will probably have to wait for a soft landing on Mars with a spacecraft, but that is still a few years away. Meanwhile, there is no lack of speculation about life on Mars and life throughout the universe. One man who firmly believes in its existence is the professor of physics at Cornell University in America. He's also done some work for the Space Agency, and he is acknowledged as a brilliant scientist. We asked him for his views on Mars, Mariner, and the great question of whether we are alone in the universe. Professor Philip Morrison.
Now, we don't know what's going to come back, and it might be that those pictures contain something fascinating. Personally, I don't think they will. I think they'll give us, well, something new. A look at a planet from 5,000 miles high that we never saw before. But I don't expect to see those canals and channels and road maps that were drawn 50 years ago. It seems pretty clear to people now that if there were anything like a developed civilization, even an ancient and ruined one on Mars, we would long since have learned something about it by light or by radio. And we have had nothing of that kind from that planet. No, I think we have to accept that if there is life on Mars, it is at best a slow sort of life, getting along in nooks and crannies of a high-altitude Arctic tundra condition. The worst conditions, I should think, that we would find anywhere on Earth do not compare to the aridity and cold and thin air of the Martian climate. But the extreme variability of our own life forms, which extend from the boiling hot springs to the Arctic snows, and you know the rest of it, you know the complexity of it all, suggests to me that a whole planet isn't going to sit there for billions of years on the margin of being livable, even according to the standards of life fit for life on Earth, and not develop some living form, if indeed it is true that the origin of life is a statistical kind of matter, coming whenever and wherever the right physical, chemical, energetic conditions are available. We don't know this to be true, though I believe it is so. If we can find that, then we'll know for sure, because we've seen it twice, that the origin of life is not a miracle, but a statistic, the result of uniform, however complicated, physical and chemical and energetic conditions suitable for its own development. And that is a big question, because if we do establish that fact, and if it is true, then we can presumably argue that wherever in the whole galaxy circumstances permit it, living forms may sooner or later arise. And you see what that means. That's one of the key links in that long chain of argument that leads us to believe that we may not be alone in this big galaxy. The astronomical links in the chain are surer. They're not certain. but they are surer than the biological ones. That's why the life on Mars is important. We know, for example, that in our own galaxy, our own whirlpool of stars, the Milky Way, there are some hundreds of millions, I say that again, some hundreds of millions of individual stars with similar stability, long life, temperature as the sun has, close enough for practical purposes. So that if around those stars there are planets, those planets will feel a regime something like the regime of Earth, Mars, Venus, somewhere in that neighborhood. Now, we're not sure of those planets. Our theories are inadequate but suggestive. We have found in a mere handful of stars something like planets, and the handful is all we've examined. So our best guess is that among the hundreds of millions of stars, a great many, a large fraction, I would say half, certainly a great many, have got suitable planets. And if there are suitable planets and suitable stars warming those planets for the billions of years of geologic time as the Earth has been warmed, then why not find life develop? And if life developed on Mars and on Earth, not specially intervened then, but just a consequence of the laws of nature, we could expect that on those 100 million planets as well, which we haven't seen but can conjecture, we would be likely to expect life to form. And once it forms, its nature we see is to evolve. And I should think it would evolve in many differentiated ways, as myriad as indeed the fish of the sea and the birds of the air and the beasts of the land on our Earth. But if development has gone on as it has gone on here, and it's had a much longer time on the average, no reason to think it's synchronized, then it would seem to me that among all these myriads of possible living fauna, sites of life, some must have developed that kind of communicative capability of which we ourselves represent the example on Earth, and must have things like radio dishes and telescopes and probes themselves. And if they exist, whatever their form or nature, it's as long as they have any parallel to our technical capability and our technical interests, and that too must occur with some probability among the many possible ways of thought, they will try to signal. I believe then that the outcome of these little probings we do in the solar system will give us the sign to go ahead for a search for those possible, quite conjectural, I have no evidence for them, but the line of argument, the odds, are strongly in the favor of those who believe that these signals are there. And I think we shall try sooner or later to make a systematic search for them. If we never search, we shall never find them. The search will be made by radio listening, I think, with the big dishes, or possibly by use of optical telescopes. One will have to think a little bit more. What is the optimum way of doing this? We're not quite sure. But I firmly believe that already there exists in our galaxy a rather sizable network of such interstellar communication to which we represent one more of many, many previous discoveries of new oncoming members of the communications chain. And if we can listen hard enough, we will find that searching beam which counts us as one of those possible prospects. And when we make that contact, across space will flow, for the first time perhaps, the information that we are not alone, and the story of the history of another world, quite different in all its aspects from our own, united only in the sense of sharing a common understanding of the order of the universe, a common ability to make its presence known over the depths of space. That remains for the future. But it is exactly in this promise that the first Mariner shot seems to me to have its greatest excitement.
Professor Philip Morrison. And that's all for tonight. Next week, instead of the depth